My Lords, may I start by apologising to the noble Baroness Lady Randerson if I cause any confusion, and I'll try and do better. May I welcome the noble Lord Hendy back to his place from his excursion, no doubt by rail, in foreign parts. We missed him at second reading, but we had an excellent substitute in the shape of the noble Baroness Lady Blake of Leeds. If I may make a preliminary remark at this stage, which I would intend, it would save me making it on future groups of amendments, it is that we are essentially, at least as far as the amendments tabled by members of the Conservative Party are concerned, we are essentially seeking information from the government in relation to this bill, and if the government is candid with us and gives us the information we're looking for, then we will have achieved our objective on behalf of the public, and that will be, so to speak, the end of the matter. If I could turn to the debate that's taken place so far, the part that sparked me most, that I felt I couldn't not answer, were the remarks of the noble Lord Snape. First of all, to agree with him about what a degradation it is that passengers have become customers, when of course they really ought to be passengers, as he correctly says, but also to address this a question of ideology, and I hope to take it out of the debate that we'll be having in this committee today and on Wednesday. Of course, there's always an element of ideology when one talks about privatisation and nationalisation. The railways, which are 200 years old, I think, this next year, have only been nationalised for about a quarter of their entire existence. So we mustn't think, first of all, that nationalisation is the natural condition of railways in this country. They have flourished and they grew and they were developed in private hands, and that is something we should always remember. But the truth is that in 1945-46, when the railways were nationalised, they were nationalised largely because after 6 years of war, they were bankrupt. There'd been no investment in them during the whole of that period, and they had deteriorated, nor was there any prospect of their making sufficient profit that private capital could have been recruited to make up that deficiency. Whether the government believed in nationalisation or not as an ideological matter, if they were to continue running at all, it was going to have to be in government hands. And they were privatised, or parts of the system were privatised in the mid-1990s for equally practical reasons. And we discussed some of these at second reading. One of the reasons was to attempt to improve customer service through competition. One was to recruit private capital into the railways on a consistent basis that the government, during the whole of the time that it owned the railways, had never been able to provide. Not enough capital and never enough consistency because no budget went beyond 12 months. Another was to try to, frankly, to break the grip of the rail unions on pay, so that the astonishing disparities that exist between, let us say, a train driver and a bus driver, which are entirely due to the monopoly supply of labour by ASLEF, might be evened out. Now, what we discussed at second reading, and what I'm perfectly happy to admit, is that on some of these fronts, privatisation has been successful, and on others less so. And if the government, which was won a majority on the basis of promising to nationalise the train operating companies, wishes to give the other side of it a kick and see if they can make it work on that basis, then I'm not actually personally objecting to them doing that, or at least not on ideological grounds. But the House is perfectly entitled to have its practical questions addressed about how this is going to work. And that is what the amendments in this group, and largely in front of the committee, many of the amendments that come before the committee later, are intending to address. Now, the government is claiming that this is a very small bill. On the one hand, it is a very big bill when they talk to the public. When they talk to the public, it's a huge bill because we're nationalising the railways. They're not really nationalising the railways, because to nationalise something you normally have to pay for it. And this bill is not something where they're paying out to shareholders. All they're actually doing is letting the franchises that exist expire and then tying their hands and preventing themselves from renewing those except in emergency circumstances. It is, as if I had more time at second reading, I would have said, it is less nationalisation and more like dismissing your chauffeur at the end of his contract and deciding you're going to drive the car yourself. Well, at least you knew the chauffeur had a driving licence and some experience and qualification in driving the car, but now we're going to have the Secretary of State, who we were told at second reading prefers to be known as the passenger-in-chief. We're now going to have the passenger-in-chief as driver-in-chief as well, in effect, and we're going to see how that actually works out. So it's a big thing when they talk to the public. It's nationalisation of the railways. But when they talk to noble lords, it's a very, very little thing. All the big things, we're told, are going to happen in the next bill, the train further down the line. It's expected in roughly a year or 18 months. That is the bill in which many of our questions should be addressed. We shouldn't be asking those questions now. But I think we should be asking many of those questions now, and for two very good reasons. The first is that this bill presents us with a measure which is regarded by the government as preliminary to that very large bill, so it has long-term consequences. But the second is, and this point was made by the noble Baroness Lady Randerson, this bill sets up a shadow structure which could persist in operation for 4 or 5 years or even longer. Because, first of all, it is going to take us a year or 18 months before we see the bill which will make these great reforms. And secondly, as anyone who's been involved in the railways or any other large organisation will know, implementing significant change as a result of that legislation is likely to take several years further. So the shadow structures being set up as a result of this bill will be something we will have to live with for many years, and the practical consequences of them deserve the most careful scrutiny.
Sorry, the Shadow Minister will allow me on that particular point.
But the way the Labour Party's going, who knows?
Well, as for that one, I have to say, my lords, it's mistakes being made at both ends of the corridor recently. But I've just, arising from what the noble lord has just said, can I just ask him to clarify 2 points? The first of all, the delay in moving on to the more detailed bill, bearing in mind that it was 2016 when the government he favours brought forward the proposals for Great British Railways. So what was the government doing in the 8 years since then? And secondly, and a simple question really about the ideology of privatisation, if nationalisation is so bad, why is almost the first act of governments in 2 world wars to nationalise the railway industry? Yeah. What makes them so essential in wartime and yet can be handed out piecemeal in peacetime?
If the noble lord will forgive me, I am asking the questions in this scenario, and I don't feel I necessarily have an answer to his question about wartime. I might pass it on to the noble lord, the minister, who once arranged for me to go and see deep in the bowels of Mayfair under the former Down Street underground station, and I'm sure the noble Lord Snape, if he hasn't been, it can be arranged for him to see it too, the wartime headquarters of the Railway Operations Executive, including what is claimed to be, although I think with no historical foundation, a tin bath in which Churchill once took a bath. But I'll say no more about the war than that. On the former question, I don't know the answer to his question. I would like to know the answer to his question. Why was it that the government, having published what they called the Shapps-Williams Review, written by Keith Williams in, I think he's correct in saying 2016, why was it, and having promised a transport bill in the King's Speech, one but last, Why was it that the government didn't come forward with the measures that it thought it could offer in that regard? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm willing to have a guess. And it's relevant to what the government is embarking on now. It's relevant to the question whether they're going to meet their 12 to 18-month deadline of delivering us with this massive bill that is going to transform the railways. And my guess is that the government found that grappling with the intense difficulties of reforming the railway on such a large scale meant that, try as they might, they found considerable difficulty in putting together that bill. And it may be that that is exactly what the noble Lord the Minister finds as he comes to address these difficulties, which only adds further to my point that the shadow arrangements we're setting up today could be with us for a very long time indeed. Now, to come to the First Amendment, the one in the name of my noble friend Lord Gascoigne, the government says it has a purpose. It isn't doing this for ideological reasons, in fact. It isn't doing it at the behest of the trades unions. It has a purpose, and the purpose is to improve passenger services. Now, at second reading, I pointed out that in the final stage impact assessment produced by the Department for Transport of the legislation, given the opportunity that they had to say exactly that, they said something completely different. They said that the bill had been prepared to enable swift delivery of a government manifesto commitment, not to improve matters for passengers. And that was why they hadn't looked, as they normally would, at the alternative options that might be put forward to achieve a similar purpose. And that is another reason why it is incumbent on us in this House to look in great detail at what the government is putting before us, because they are in effect asking us to buy into an article of faith. They are simply saying, well, it couldn't be worse than it is at the moment. That is actually simply untrue. There are problems with the railways, but they could be a great deal worse than they are at the moment. It couldn't be worse than it is at the moment, so it's bound to be better if we take it over and run it ourselves as part of a national enterprise. But they have not, in fact, provided any evidence for that. They have simply stated, this must be the case and you've got to believe us. And as I say, that's one of the reasons why our job is not to do so. Now, my noble friend Lord Gascoigne, in his amendment, seeks to make good this deficiency that's been pointed out by the Department for Transport, that the bill has no purpose other than the delivery of a government manifesto commitment, and that no other alternatives have been looked at to achieve the purpose of the bill. And he has tried to clarify and state on the face of the bill why we are doing this. And he has put this forward in terms which the government, in words that the government itself has been using. So there really should be no problem at all, it seems to me, on the part of the government when the noble Lord the Minister comes to reply, in stating, yes, this is our purpose, and this should be on the face of the bill, so that everyone who looks at this bill, I don't mean as passengers, but those involved in implementing it from the Secretary of State down, knows exactly what it is should be guiding them as a principle when they come to make their decisions about how to put it into effect. May I? Yes, of course.
Can I try and help him? My understanding of where the government is on this issue is that they are committed to a comprehensive package of rail reform, and that the bill for the comprehensive package will be introduced next spring. The purpose of this bill is a relatively minor reform, in my view, in the context of the much bigger reform, which is to make sure that the franchises can transition to public ownership, at minimum cost to the Exchequer. So if you're going to do it at minimum cost to the Exchequer, you have to do it quickly, which is why this has been one of the earliest bills that the government has put forward.
Well, the noble lord puts the government's case very well, and how much the House has lost in not seeing him on the front bench as the minister, given that he was the shadow minister up until the point of the general election. So the government, we're told by the noble lord, has a package of reforms. We all have a package of reforms. We know what the package of reforms looks like. It's in the Shapps-Williams Review. And yet what we are seeing is a package of reforms from the government that differs very significantly from the Williams Review, and that is why it needs such careful scrutiny. My Lords, I'll be brief on the remaining amendments given the passage of time, but all of the amendments in my name here seek to test the effects of this measure on the performance of the industry and in the light of the nationalisation which the government is proposing. And the amendments, taken separately, deal with different types of performance. Some deal with the performance of the railways insofar as they engage with passengers, that is, timeliness and efficiency and service quality and so forth. Some relate to the performance of the railways in relation to finances. We will come in more detail to finances later. The government claims this bill has no financial consequences. There are those of us on this side of the House, they include the noble Baroness Lady Randerson, who treat that approach with a very great deal of scepticism. And there are others that seek to examine its effect in relation to the performance of the network as a whole. All of these amendments, I hope, would be accepted by the government, because if they are going to make these changes, there needs to be transparency, and the public need to be able to see metrics published, possibly by an independent body, possibly by the Department for Transport. We're open to persuasion on that, which show how the railway is performing. I know the government, which has come to power committed to transparency, would not want to resile from that, and so I expect, if not support for detailed amendments as tabled, I expect the noble Lord the Minister, when he comes to speak, to have no difficulty in saying that at a report stage the government will be putting forward amendments that will show how this measure, how this bill is going to be monitored in its implementation.